Hi, readers. Today, for our lesson, we talked about types of characters. I think I gave everybody this worksheet either Friday or if you missed it today and you're a AA student, I've got extras. Just remind me that you need to have these sheets for your notebook. If you have these sheets from Friday or if you're an all remote student and you have these sheets, you can go ahead and glue them in as we go through the meeting. We started out by talking about the types of characters today. The hero, or the protagonist, is the central character of the story. Usually it's called the main character. This is usually the character that's faced with our conflict or a problem that has to be solved. So they're the ones that usually deal with problem and solution. Okay, so characters can be one of two ways. You can either have a flat character or a round character. So these are kind of opposite things. If a character only has one personality trait or characteristic, it's generally described as a flat character. A rounded character would be any character that has a complex personality. It's more fully developed. For example, if we were talking about Zeus, he might be more rounded. He makes choices based on different events and stories. But Spider from our Adventures in Spider, he tends to be a flat character. He's always the trickster, always the one getting in trouble. So he tends to have one characteristic, like he's foolish or he's greedy, that kind of surfaces throughout the story. Another way we can describe characters is dynamic or static. So these would also be opposites. Um, so a dynamic character is a character that changes over time. This is the character that's going to resolve a conflict. For example, Augie in Wonder, he's a dynamic character. You know, he doesn't like school very much at first. He's got to work on his friendships and build those friendships, and he's got to resolve his conflict with Jack Will. A static character would be a character who does not change over time. Their personality stays the same. For example, in our Cinderella stories, the sisters in all of those stories were generally static. They did not change over time. They were mean at the beginning and mean at the end, and they never really changed. So these would be types of characters. These vocabulary words are words that we're going to use throughout our fiction unit when we talk about characters. So we're going to use this as a tool. We use our reader's notebook as a tool to learn about, to be able to talk about our characters. Okay, another sheet that I gave you, or I will give you, and you remind me, I gave you a list of character traits, and I also gave you a blank one because we can fill it in as we go. I liked how this list was organized by like opposites, nice and mean, sad, positive and negative traits, like good traits that we want to follow. Negative traits would be traits that we don't tend to want to do in our daily lives. We have does a little, does very little. And so I like how they categorize some of these traits. It makes it a little bit more easy to find what I'm looking for. And as you read, we might add traits to our list, or when you're doing your daily reading, you can add traits to the list too. The next sheet I want you to glue in is this one. We'll do our anchor chart first. How do we learn about characters? So as we're reading about a character, we think about what does that character do? How does that character act around others? What is the character thinking about? What do we learn from that character's thoughts? And finally, we also look at a character's dialogue. What does this character say to other characters in the text? How does he talk to other characters? Is he bossy? Is he mean? Is the character saying nice things? So how does that dialogue impact? Okay, so this was our chart for today. And we're going to use the story, The Adventures of Spider, West African Folk Tales. We're going to go to our story, Why Does Spider Hide in Corners? Why does Spider live in dark corners? As we read, we're going to think about those character traits that those common characteristics of characters. So characters are flat or they demonstrate one personality trait or characteristic, such as cleverness or foolishness or bravery or evil. Let's see what we would say about Spider today. We also want to look at animal characters since Spider is an animal, but how does he get personalized as a human? What qualities does he have that are more like human characteristics? And finally, what is the lesson that Spider learns today in this story? And how does that lesson teach us, the reader, how to behave in real life? All right, let's listen. Spider lived in a house made of banana leaves with his wife Aso and his two sons. Behind the banana leaf house was a garden. In the garden, Spider and his wife and his two sons planted yams and corn and tomatoes and bananas and lemons and oranges. When the rain came every year, the garden grew beautiful and Spider's family had plenty to eat. Every day, Aso cooked rice and vegetables, meat and peppers into a big stew. It was delicious, and Spider ate until he could eat no more. You might have thought Spider would be satisfied, but of course he was not. He wanted to have even more good things to eat. I am afraid he wanted to eat most of the time when he was not sleeping. In other words, when he wasn't sleeping, he was thinking about food. I can kind of identify with that a little bit. What can I do? Spider asked himself. There's so many good things in my garden, and yet I can only eat half of them. I wish I could think of a way to have more. So, Spider sat in his garden and he thought, and at last he had an idea. He told his wife he was not feeling well and that he was going to see the village magician. The magician knew many things and could tell what would happen next month or next year. After a while, Spider returned, and when Aso asked him what happened, Spider told her that the magician said he was very sick and that very soon he would die. Aso and her sons were sad, but Spider only said, Since I am going to die soon, you must make a place to bury me. I want you to put me here in the spot next to where the tomatoes are growing. For Spider loved tomatoes best of all. When Aso had dug a deep hole for Spider's burial place, Spider said, Now I want you to put in some spoons and knives and forks, some cooking pots, so that I can feed myself in the next world. And Aso and her son put spoons and forks and knives and cooking pots in the grave. One day, very soon after, Spider pretended to get sick and die. He lay very still, closed his eyes, and tried to stop breathing. Aso and her two sons shed many tears and put Spider in his grave just beside the tomato patch. Spider stayed in the deep grave for several days. His family had a fine funeral, and many people came to mourn for him. They brought food and sang funeral songs and played the funeral drums. When it was over, Spider sat up happily in his grave. He did not mind spending the day there because he loved to sleep anyway. And when night fell, can you guess what Spider did? Very quietly, he lifted up the cover of his grave. He looked about to make sure everyone was sleeping. And when he saw it was safe, he crept out very slowly. Sometimes the moon was so bright, Spider could see everything in the garden. He quickly picked several of the very best tomatoes. Then he pulled up some of the best yams. He cut off the green, juicy peppers and pulled up a few big onions. Then Spider crept into the chicken yard and plucked himself a nice fat chicken. When he had everything he wanted, Spider went back into his deep grave. He cooked himself a grand feast, and he ate all night long. Now, it was not so long after that Aso and her sons began to notice that something was happening in their garden. Every morning, some of the best tomatoes and yams were missing. They wondered who could be stealing from their garden. So, Aso thought of a clever way to catch the thief. She bought a great pile of straw, and out of this she built a man that looked just like a real man. Then Aso got a bucket of soft, sticky beeswax. She covered the straw man with a thick coat of the sticky beeswax, and when she finished, she set the man in the middle of the tomato patch. like a scarecrow. That night, as soon as everyone was asleep, Spider crept out, as usual, and he was just about to pluck a big juicy tomato when he saw the man standing in the middle of his garden. Spider was so angry, he forgot all about trying to be quiet. "Who are you?" he shouted. "What are you doing in my garden?" But instead of explaining himself, the man only looked at him. "So, you won't talk, eh? Where's your tongue?" asked Spider. "Get out of my garden at once." Still the man said nothing. He only looked at Spider and stood still. "Do you think I am playing? I will teach you a lesson," screamed Spider, and with that he hit the wax man as hard as he could with his right hand. Oof! His hand stuck fast in the beeswax. Spider could not move it, though he pulled very hard. "So," he screamed, "you're trying to be clever? I'll show you." And he hit the wax man with his left fist, and that stuck too. So Spider was stuck to the man with both hands. "What is this? You are really too much," cried Spider. "Do you know who I am? I will teach you a lesson." And with that he gave a mighty kick to the wax man. What do you think happened? Why, of course, his foot stuck fast and he could not move it. "Haven't you learned yet? Well, I'll give you another kick." And Spider kicked the wax man with his other foot, but it too stuck. Now Spider was stuck hand and foot to the wax man. He began to get a little frightened. Still he tried again. "I'm stronger than you," he shouted. He gave the wax man a tight squeeze, and his stomach stuck to the wax man. "I will win this yet," said Spider, and he butted that wax man with his head as hard as he could. And of course his head stuck fast too. The next morning, Asa and her two sons went into the garden to see if they had caught their thief. Imagine their surprise when they found Spider stuck to the wax man from head to foot. At once they understood everything. They pulled Spider down and took him to the chief to be judged a thief. Everyone knew who the thief was then, and the people in the village laughed at Spider and made up funny songs about him. And after a time, poor Spider was so ashamed of himself that he ran into the darkest corner of the ceiling to hide. And there he has lived ever since. All right. So today in our discussion, as we were reading, we talked about how some of the characteristics that Spider shows is that he is greedy. He has plenty to eat, but he wanted more and more. He was foolish, hitting and kicking. We said times 6 because he hit with two hands and then 2 legs and then his head and then his stomach. And he should have stopped when he noticed he was getting stuck. He should have stopped. Sneaky because he pretended he was sick. Selfish because he kept wanting more and more and more. We also noticed that Spider acts like a human because spiders don't really worry about being buried and going to a grave. Spiders don't use pots and pans and utensils, and they definitely don't cook or plant their food in a garden. They don't build scarecrows. They don't keep chickens. Spiders don't punch and kick and get mad. So he even had human emotions, human feelings. Spiders, obviously they have mothers and fathers when they're born, but they don't really live in a family group, and especially not a family group that lives like in a house of banana leaves. So then we talked about the lesson. If you work too hard to get something, you might lose it. Don't be greedy. Treat your family with respect. Don't steal. Appreciate what you have. And this was my favorite. The greedier you are, the less you might end up with. So Spider, trying to get all of those things for himself and not share them with the rest of his family, ended up costing him a lot more in the end. I hope you enjoyed this story today, and I hope as you are doing your reading that you're going to think about the kinds of characters you have in your books and the things that those characters do and the things that they teach you as a reader. So the last 2 pages that I gave you, or that I will give you, are these character trait pages. And as you're going through and doing your reading at home, think about we just changed this to title instead of name. Think about a character from your book. What character trait would you give them? Is it a character trait on this list? Or is it perhaps a different character trait? You can see that we added greedy for Spider because that wasn't on our list. Use your how do we describe characters. What does your character act like in your book? What do they do? What are some of their thoughts? And what are the things that they say to others that teach you about what their traits are? And then you can use those things as your text evidence when you describe your character. The second part is to think about how your character reacts to problems or challenges. So you think about what is the problem the character is facing and how do they respond to that. Characters are very important parts of stories. And so as we're reading, we always want to think about what those characters teach us as readers about how we should act or how we should not act in our own daily lives. All right. Thank you for reading with me. Make sure you show me these pages in a photo to prove that you've been to the lesson today. And I will put a little check beside you that shows that you did the lesson. All right. Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.